Hi, hope you're well. I wrote a story. This one's called Fixer Upper, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get right in. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,250 square feet. The ad in the paper brandished a 3-story house nestled safely inside an overgrown 20 acres of southern forest. The basement was unfinished, and the rest of the place would undoubtedly need repairing and updating, but the asking price was so low that it would be stupid not to at least consider it. The listing was well worth a double take, hell, even a triple take. There was time to think over it after all, now that Ava didn't have any work to busy herself with on the weekends. It was something she was getting used to, working a steady 9 to 5 on the weekdays, but it was a welcome change, with the salary it came with. It was easy enough to manage, now that college wasn't on her plate with it, and while the work was boring, it offered her one thing that she'd never had before: financial security. She didn't necessarily feel any different now that she had it, but the fact that she was even looking at a housing listing in the first place was a testament to how far she'd come. She hadn't been seeking it out, however. It was her laptop that was opened up to an online marketplace, and she'd originally been looking for a couch to replace her ratty old one from her college days. The isolated forest sanctuary had brandished itself to her with no intention on her part, but it was beautiful, at least from the pictures, and at least in spirit. The wood panels on the outside of the house were all overgrown with ivy and kudzu, and while the front porch was made of concrete, it was discolored with a generation's worth of grime. A chimney poked out from the side of a sea of crumbling shingles bearing leaf litter and plants just beginning to thrive. Greens sprouted from the gutters too, and the backyard was a wasteland of jungle-like proportion. The inside was tamer, thank God, but every appliance was outdated and every floor was covered in old carpet that Ava could smell the musty stench of through her computer screen. Any of those house flipper people would turn away crying and screaming at the sight of it, she knew. But more and more, a quiet knowledge settled itself inside her head. It has good bones. It would take some time, but I think it could be fixed up. I could see myself living here. The price was so low, too, it was borderline criminal. Despite how outdated and in desperate need of repair the property was, Ava still couldn't help but ask herself what the catch was. Surely it had one, though the pictures and the listing description seemed to keep everything labeled and on the tin. Maybe the house is haunted. She could have easily seen the house in the photos being used as a set for an old 80s slasher film, but Ava never really considered herself the superstitious type. Plus, if it were ghosts, who was to say they were all bad? She'd always believed that if they did exist, they couldn't possibly be all angry and vengeful. She didn't know, but there was an address for a date for an open house at the property, and Ava resolved to stop by the next day. She was too intrigued by it all just to set it aside, and even if she had no formal experience fixing up a house, she was confident she could learn if she did decide to think more seriously about the property. It couldn't hurt to look. It was the next Monday, about 7 p.m., when Ava found herself at the address. "It's a fixer-upper for sure," said the agent, surveying the handful of people that had gathered around the dilapidated kitchen of the grand old house, "but it's got great potential. If you put time and care into a place like this, it's going to care for you right back." Throughout the evening, Ava had discovered just how accurate those pictures were, musty carpet smell and all. The agent tried to spin the place into a positive light with his salesman charisma, but none of his charms had an effect on her. It was cheesy, if anything, how thickly he laid on the idea that this place could be something great. He was pulling out all the stops to get his commission, she knew. A few other people had shown up to the open house. An old couple, a younger one, and a man about Ava's age. For the most part, the house retained a certain solemn, lonely feeling. The journey through the overgrown, nature-enshrouded driveway had set a certain tone of entering into an entirely different world, separate from the usual bustle of life. It was eerie, almost liminal, but also oddly enchanting. As the agent talked about square footage and embellished the same information Ava had already read on the listing, she drifted away from the kitchen and into the hallway. The dingy carpet helped to mask her footsteps, and she passed a small closet and a bathroom. She carefully examined each, picturing what she'd change about them and how she'd use them if she lived here. The closet was fine, really, it just needed a deep clean, but the bathroom seemed to need more work done. A new shower head, maybe, more modern faucets. Ava hovered in the doorway and peered at the toilet. In all honesty, she didn't want to touch something like that with a 20-foot pole. She turned around quickly, but felt something bump into her from behind. A little girl faced her, and Ava was immediately apologetic. "Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm so sorry." She hadn't realized the young couple had brought a kid with them. Are you alright? I didn't hurt you, did I?" The kid didn't say anything. Instead, she turned and darted off down the hallway. Ava hoped she wouldn't get an earful from her parents later about that, but she went on to look at the bedrooms. The master bedroom she found was in the sorriest state. The popcorn ceiling had a huge, nasty-looking yellow-brown spot in its center, and it was something even Ava, in all her non-existent experience, could tell was water damage. Serious at that. She rounded in on it, but when her foot pressed into the carpet beneath it, she could immediately tell something was wrong with the floorboards underneath. She didn't push her luck any and turned right back out instead. There was one last door she hadn't looked at yet, just at the very end of the hallway. The basement, she figured. It had to be. The door was different from the others, sturdier and more solid. She closed her fist around the knob, but didn't get to turn it. A voice from behind stopped her. "The basement's off limits for the open house, I'm afraid." The agent's honey-sweet words eased her hand from the door. She turned to him and saw across the hallway the other guests were getting ready to leave. "You can schedule a private viewing if you're interested in the property, however," he offered. "We can show you every microscopic detail, whatever floats your boat, though I do have to disclose this place has, history." "What do you mean by that?" Ava asked, immediately curious. She walked back out to the kitchen, and the agent followed behind her. "Well," he began, but his honeyed tone seemed to turn to molasses. "There was a death on the premises. It's been some 30 years now, but, the seller felt it was something that needed to be mentioned." Ava considered this, and she nodded carefully. "Who died?" A young girl, but I don't know the details beyond that. And the price isn't a reflection of that, no. They're just eager to move out of state and to be with family. So it's quite a steal if you ask me." "I'm sure it is," Ava agreed idly, amused by how quickly the man's salesmanly tone had returned. She was getting ready to leave herself and looked around to see the man and the old couple were long gone now. The younger couple lingered out in the front yard. "So, would you like to schedule a private viewing?" the agent pushed. Ava made her way to the front door, digging her keys from her bag. Her curiosity about the house had been, for the most part, satiated. She wasn't so sure if she wanted to pursue it anymore. I'll think about it. I've got your card." And with a polite thank you for his hosting, Ava was out of the house. She'd almost forgotten what breathing was like, free of that musty carpet air. She headed towards her car, but paused when she eyed the young couple alone, talking to themselves. The car was running, but empty. She cleared her throat. Hey, I think I saw your kid back in the house, if you're missing her." Ava motioned to the front door. The couple turned to her, but the man looked confused. Our kid's at home. She's gotta be someone else's, sorry." Ava was just as confused, but apologized and let them be. It was only their car, Ava's, and the agent's that remained in the driveway. Maybe it was her fault for assuming, she mused, settling herself in her driver's seat. The girl must have been the agent's, or maybe... The man's disclosure about the little girl from 30 years ago rattled in her mind, but no, that didn't make any sense. She pushed it from her mind on her drive back home and went about the rest of the day without thinking about the house. Throughout the week, though, it settled in her mind like a monument of possibility. Ava hated her current apartment, she always had, and the idea of having someplace better to go, a place to grow into, a place to put down roots, it was thrilling. She called the agent back and scheduled a private viewing for the next week, thinking maybe she could make this work, seriously. In the meantime, she spent her hours off work watching online tutorials and house renovations. She was back at the house for the viewing before she knew it, and she eagerly asked to see every detail of the property. It was no less worse for wear, and she was allowed to see the basement now in all its glory. She understood immediately why it had been off limits. The smell in there was something awful, and it was packed wall to wall with boxes and junk that the former owners presumably hadn't wanted to take with them. But there were little things that drew Ava in about the house too, like the charming vintage window in the attic and the blackberry bushes and mulberry trees in the backyard. She would have her work cut out for her, but The house was more and more like a burr on her pant leg, clinging on, never letting go. Her and the agent were back by the kitchen talking about the asking price and paperwork and other boring legalities when something came back to the forefront of Ava's mind. She was acutely aware of the fact that they were the only two people in the house. "Do you have a kid, by the way?" she asked, a bit abruptly. The agent shook his head. No, but if I did, this would be the perfect place for them, I think. Plenty of room to start a family here. Anyways, I think we can get a few grand off the asking price, but you'd have to put in an offer soon." It was less than a week later when Ava really bit the bullet. She checked her bank account, got everything she needed to in order, and put in a proper offer for the listing. And it wasn't even a day later when she got a response. It was accepted. They didn't even try to haggle her for a higher price. Ava was ecstatic. And the day she received the keys and the title was moved to her name, Ava went back to the property with one goal in mind: a detailed inspection. The notebook at her side was soon to become an exhaustive master list for every little thing that needed to be done to fix the property up to her liking. The cosmetic updates were the easiest to note down: repainting walls, retiling kitchen floor, but the work would run deeper than that. New appliances, of course, which could very well mean having to redo some of the plumbing and electrical, but Ava decided she could comfortably get the whole project started just by deep cleaning the place from top to bottom, especially that cluttered basement. And tearing out rank carpet, maybe tearing down a wall or two. There were a few of them with no outlets. It'd be an easy way to open up the space. There were other things she wanted to get down on paper: what color she wanted to refinish the kitchen cabinets with, what tiles to use for the bathroom backsplash, but by the time she felt she'd written it all down, she'd filled 3 whole pages. As she went out of the house for the day, she remembered to add something else too: fix the toilets. That was a pretty high priority. It'd be a hell of a renovation to do if she had to drive off-site every time she needed to use the bathroom. And it was going to take a lot of work and research and trial and error and trying and failing and trying again, but Ava felt oddly good about it. It was new, it was enticing, it was the idea of finishing this project with a sanctuary she could call her own. It was everything. She spent her time at her day job just dreaming about it, and over the next few weeks she spent her other waking hours collecting the tools and materials she'd need for the cleaning and demolition. It was on the weekend, when she was off work, when she really got into the thick of it. Ava decided to tackle cleaning the house from the front door first, then work her way inwards. It took her the whole of her weekend just to haul all the junk out. She even ended up calling in a service that could put a portable dumpster out in the driveway. Most of the real junk was in the basement. The boxes and old moldy furniture and out-of-date appliances that she couldn't find any use for and couldn't sell. They all had to go. That was the worst part of the cleaning up process for Ava. Some of the larger pieces had her spending a few favors from friends to get it all cleared out. When all was said and done, she didn't have any time left over before it was Monday, and she had to get back to her job. There was one odd thing that happened, however. Just when she'd gotten down to the last few boxes in the basement, there was one that seemed to stand out to her. It was smaller than the other boxes, printed with some food brand that made her think it was very clearly far older than the rest. In blown-out ink across its face were 2 words: Alice's Toys. Ava had been about to toss it out along with the rest of the basement junk, but instead she brought it up to the kitchen and rested it on the counter. It was all so dusty, so dirty, so old and fragile looking, she worried it all turned to dust in her hands if she dared inspect the objects individually, but she could see faded coloring books, a crumbling box of crayons, and a doll with a moth-eaten dress. Something about it had struck her as intensely important, almost crucial to the house. And it made her smile for some odd reason she couldn't explain. It was something she thought upon throughout the next week, along with how she was going to continue with the house. The cleaning and demolition were next, she knew. That coming weekend, she scraped away gunk, mopped dirty tiles, vacuumed and swept. Then she was tearing up the carpets, cleaning again, vacuuming again, taking a sledgehammer to a blank wall, cleaning again, vacuuming again. She'd taken down the most of the drywall panels along an entire wall before she was starting to lose steam for the day, but before she went home, she wanted to take down one last wall. It was one that separated the kitchen from the living room, and once it was gone, she'd have a much better picture of what the finished space would look like. She readied her sledgehammer once more, reeled back, and sent it flying towards the wall. It lodged into the drywall with a satisfying thunk, and she wrenched it out to repeat the motion. She reeled back again, but something about the hole she'd made her freeze. The darkness suddenly expanded and a small army of dark spots came pouring out of the wall. Ava flew backwards as roaches scuttled out and off in every direction, from the popcorn ceiling to the bare, staple-littered floor. When she felt one of them on her hand, she dropped the sledgehammer and nearly screamed. She left the house not a moment after and didn't come back until she was armed with a respirator and enough pesticides to incite nothing short of guerrilla warfare. It was a crawl toward sunset, tearing down the rest of the wall, hauling chunks of scrap drywall into garbage bags and coating anything that moved with a thick layer of roach spray, but she managed to get the demolition done before the weekend was over. Peeling away some of the crown molding had revealed some black spots that Ava knew wasn't roaches, however. It was the same spotting she'd seen on the bathroom ceiling. She recognized it now. Black mold. She sprayed the spots with some bleach and gave them a good scrub, praying it would all be dead by the time she got back to the house the next weekend. After work the coming week, Ava spent a lot of time researching how to get rid of roaches, black mold, proper cleaning strategies. A lot of her sources recommended hiring professionals, but something about that idea struck a particularly nasty chord for Ava. She was the one meant to fix it, and she knew she could do it, as long as she took her time. She needed to fix it. Alone. It was the next weekend when she was back. Ava found she quite liked her new schedule, and she was proud of the progress she was making. First of all, she inspected the state of the infestation around the torn-down walls. Not 1 square foot of the area was free of the dead bugs with bellies facing the sky. They were all dead, for the most part. One was still squirming on the ground, but one decisive spray with the pesticide ensured its quick demise. The only real hang-up was the mold. By the wall it was gone, but in the bathroom things hadn't really improved. There were still little pinprick black spots in the corners, ones she knew would be doomed to regrow. She settled for adding it to her list, along with doing something with that old box of toys. But she did cross off tear down carpet while she was at it. Plumbing was up next. Electrical she was purposefully stalling on. Unclogging a toilet was a lot more manageable in comparison. Ava readied a plunger, a wrench, a brush, all the tools she felt she might need. She was so sure about the simplicity of the job that she didn't really bother looking up a tutorial for it. First off, she jiggled the handle. Like she'd seen before, it didn't release any water into the bowl. She'd lift the lid, look inside, be briefly horrified by the smell. There was a valve inside the tank that didn't look quite right to her, so she used a brush handle to wedge it open. Then she spent a small eternity that her back was doomed to feel later, hunching over the toilet, plunging the bowl itself. Something was lodged inside the pipes, she was sure of it. She continued the movement over and over. Her arms were getting tired, but she continued on. Something out of the corner of her eye made her pause, though. It was a movement from outside the doorway. Her hands were still firmly planted on the plunger, but she whipped her head around. She could have sworn she heard footsteps, faint and light, like a small child skipping down the hall. Alice? She wrenched the plunger from the toilet, focused entirely on the spot she'd seen the movement, but a noise from the tank brought her attention back. The water in the bowl was rising, and quickly she blinked, then rushed to find the shut-off valve to stop the water. The toilet was making a sound she'd never heard before. Shit, where's that valve? It wasn't until the water had gotten all over the floor that she found it. Cleaning up the water after was a serious blow to the ego, but even worse happened when she was picking up the sopping wet towels she'd used to mop up the water. By the back of the toilet's base, she saw a little dark spot crawling along the wall. A cockroach. There was a tiredness in Ava's bones upon seeing that she was done for the day, if not the weekend already. She added get rid of cockroaches to her list, same for fixed toilet. Maybe she needed to consult those tutorials after all, but she didn't need a plumber, not yet. She could still do this, she knew that. In fact, she decided that the next day, while the plumbing was still fresh on her mind, she'd go down into the basement and fix the pipes there instead. It was admittedly an uglier scene down in the basement. The pipes and water heater down there were significantly older than the toilet and sinks upstairs, probably even original to when the house was built. Some of the pipes along the ceiling especially were so old, some wrapped in tape at some points. Ava wondered how they even managed to hold up for so long. She's going to be replacing them now, though. She'd bought some sturdier ones, better material, and the process would be relatively simple if the tutorials served her right. The most difficult part, she thought, would be finding the home's shut-off valve. Even that didn't take very long to do. Just by the hot water heater, there was a collection of pipes. one of which had a few valves and a meter with an arrow pointing to some numbers. Ava figured that was what she was looking for, and was assured of this when turning it produced a satisfying sound. Bingo. After that, Ava went upstairs to grab her stepladder and came back down to plant it just below the rustiest of the pipes. All the tools she thought she'd need were fixed to her belt, and she resolvedly began unscrewing the bolt that held up the rusty pipe. A few drops of water fell down onto her, then more than a few drops, but Ava thought nothing of it. She hadn't given the pipes the most time to drain, and since they weren't at an angle, it would have only been natural that there would still be a little water of them. But then the flood came, just after she'd loosened two of the bolts. Water started bursting through, spraying into her face, and she couldn't even see what was happening until she was thoroughly soaked. Trying to lift the pipe back up didn't work, it only dislodged it further. Ava was in panic mode. She had to think quickly. She went back to the valves and turned every single one of them that she could, hoping for the water to stop, but it didn't. The floor was covered in water. Her only saving grace became when she exited the basement entirely and looked around the property for another shut-off valve. It turned out to be a box by the edge of the property, and just to get the thing open, she had to hurry to the hardware store for a key. Even as she tapped her foot in line at the register, still soaked with rusty old water, she could hear the sound of the small waterfall turning her basement into an indoor pool. It was hell, the drive back. Her hands shook as she opened the box and finally shut off the water, for real this time. And when she went back to the house, she hovered by the basement steps for a long while, scared to go down and bear witness to the damage. It was awful. The smell of rust and water where rust and water should not be filled her nose and washed despair over her in brutal waves. She didn't know how water could even get through the pipe this fast. She didn't know how she was supposed to get it all out. The only thing she knew was to wade through the water and pull the ladder out from it. If only she could leave it outside to dry. She paced around the rest of the house as she thought about what to do. Something tight and painful was settling itself in her chest. She couldn't deal with it today. It would have to wait until at least she knew how to deal with it. The basement's floor was concrete anyways. It would have to be okay. In the master bedroom, she looked out the window to the wilderness of a backyard. She wanted to make this work, desperately so. Maybe a year from now she'd be in bed, in this room, grateful that she hadn't given up. She went to the doorway to picture it and flicked on the light switch. Then the light bulb busted, and her daydream withered. It was all so infinitely frustrating to her, this renovation. More and more, the house was the pit in her stomach in physical form. It was exhausting even being in the building. The weight of what all was still left to do, it sat heavy on her shoulders. It was Friday, not even an afternoon into her weekly routine, and she was so profoundly tired already. Ava retired to the front porch steps, letting her legs stretch out and her eyes trail across the unruly lawn. The crabgrass, the pokeweed, the fleabane, all thriving so well it felt like a mockery to her. There wasn't one dead stem, not a single shriveled leaf, not even towards the cement that made up the house's foundation. Wait. Ava craned her neck and peered down at those cement foundations. Right where the stone met the earth, she saw something she could have sworn hadn't been there before. Little cracks, only as wide as the thin side of a coin. They were barely visible under the lush grass, but it looked like they stretched down deep, deep into the ground. The foundation, it was cracked. Ava's already defeated expression only wilted further. She'd worked so hard already, came so far to get to this point. She'd learned so much, but if the house's foundation itself was doomed to bring everything crumbling down, she sat with her head in her hands at the mouth of the war zone of her own creation for a long, long while. It was a beast, a hydra, this undertaking she'd put upon herself. She briefly wondered if she should lower her standards for the place, clean up what she had, and work around all the issues even after she moved in. She briefly wondered if she should give it up entirely, put the house back on the damn market and into someone else's hands. Anyone else's hands. Anyone's but hers. Don't give up, please. The voice came from behind her. It was soft but desperate. The voice of a young girl. Ava didn't have to turn around to know she had tears in her eyes. Don't you want to live with me? Ava breathed in deeply. She steeled herself against the liquid despair starting to boil to her surface. But something else bubbled too, something red and hot and burning. She wrenched her head from her hands. She got to her feet and she turned to face the mountain she was determined to climb. Of course I do. Something in the must-coated air that wafted out of the house had changed now, altered in quality, or maybe something had changed in Ava. Either way, her steps inside the belly of the beast was as the confident marching of a soldier set on liberating his comrades from the clutches of the enemy. She'd do at least one thing to work towards her goal today, even if it killed her, and that would start with replacing that busted light bulb in the master bedroom. She grabbed the stepladder from outside with newfound motivation and slid it down to the master bedroom. The floorboards creaked and wavered in protest as she planted it firmly in the center of the room, but she wasn't going anywhere. She stepped up the ladder confidently and unscrewed the bolt that fastened the light cover to the ceiling with a resolved smile. She backpedaled, going down the rungs to set the cover down on the ground, and felt the ladder wobble without her weight. She struck out a hand to steady it better, but then it lurched. "I'm sorry," she heard the somber whisper behind her from the doorway before the sounds of splintering wood overtook it. The ladder gave out from under her, and the floor beneath her feet followed. She plunged into the nothingness below, roaring water like lightning in her ears before it all went black. But now, you'll never have to leave. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed. See you next week.